Welcome back to another episode of Junko F Jr. Been putting some miles on the old truck, but got a few things that we need to improve upon. There's always little things that need improving. So one of them is, if you remember when we were rebuilding the truck on the whole front end, we put the cooler right underneath here for the power steering because it's a Hydro Boost truck and the transmission cooler, and it has a fan on top. But I wasn't 100% sure what I needed to do when I put it on. So there's a temperature setting unit switch in line on the transmission line, so whenever the transmission gets hot enough, it turns the fan on. But I wasn't sure if that was right or wrong. In theory, the transmission would heat up first, but what's actually happened as I've been putting some miles on it and figuring it out, the transmission is the slower one to heat up and the power steering is heating up quicker. And occasionally, as it's warming up a little bit down here and our winter weather is kind of going away, I can hear the power steering starting to whine just a little bit, so I know that fluid's getting hot. So I'm going to add a second switch to that system. This one will be on the power steering side, and I'm going to hook them in line so that either one can turn on the fan, whichever one heats up quicker. Because I was thinking, well, if there's a instance where I'm pulling a trailer, let's say, and we got a load on it, then the transmission's probably going to heat up quicker than the brakes and the power steering fluid. So it's a give and take, which is going to heat up quicker. There's not, I don't think, a perfect solution other than just putting a switch on both of them, and then either one can turn on the fan, whichever heats up quicker, so we know we're going to knock that out. Next thing, and this one really kind of frustrates me. Obviously all the paint and bodywork turned out awesome on this truck, but on the passenger side, we have the famous floorboard wet situation. Now it's all dry. I've pulled the carpet back and it's rusty from where it had already done some damage, and since it had got wet that one time, I dried it all out, sanded the floor down, wire wheeled it, primed it, and put a fresh coat of paint on it just to try to get that sealed up so that we don't lose our floorboards anytime soon. But there's a leak somewhere, and you can definitely see this one little trail coming down here. But once it hits this insulation on the back of the carpet, it just goes everywhere, soaks this entire side. It was all rusty. Now this is from where, you know, after I painted it, coming out of the insulation there, so that's all clean and in good shape. But what I've been doing a bunch of reading on, typical Squarebody stuff, it's not the AC box. As far as I can tell, it's probably going to be under the cowl area. So what we're going to do is, as much as I hate to do it because there's such a high chance of scratching everything, windshield wipers have to come off. We're going to lift this cowl panel off, and then there's a plastic screen under here. You can see the little black squares there, so we'll take that off. That gives us access to that whole cowl area, which is where the air conditioning system used to get its fresh air, but I put it in permanent recirculate mode because we're in Florida and it's hot, so we don't have to worry about that. But in all that ductwork area and cowl inside the firewall there, I'm going to get all the old seam sealer out of it that I can, wire brush all that stuff, kill whatever rust is there, and then we're going to put in some fresh seam sealer and hopefully get all that squared away so we don't have this thing getting wet in the future, because that really breaks my heart to see that insulation getting wet, because it's just going to kill that floorboard, and I don't want to replace that thing anytime soon. I don't ever want to do it. So we're going to preserve that as long as we can by putting some fresh seam sealer on it and hoping for the best. All right, so we're going to start by sucking out as much of the old power steering fluid as we can, just to try to make less of a mess when we drain it at the bottom. I'll have a drain pan under it anyways, but this can, you know, has potential to make life and work a little bit easier. So we'll suck out whatever's in the reservoir, and then we'll climb underneath it and get our hands dirty. All right, so I unbolted the 4 bolts, dropped this whole bracket and cooler assembly down. As luck would have it, the outermost line up there on the frame rail is going to be the forwardmost one here. This is going to be the hottest part of the power steering / Hydro Boost circuit. So this is where we're going to put that inline switch. So what we've got is the same thing that's already on it, 35020 Durali. Pretty nice little piece. So it's just a inline number 6 AN fitting, and it's actually a pressure takeoff, but they just screw this brass bushing in here with a little temperature switch. And this just completes the ground circuit, which actually trips a relay. I didn't want all the power going through here, so we're just going to add this in line in the ground circuit with the other switch that we already have, and it should work just fine, but we're going to find out. So I'm going to set the camera down because this gets a little bit messy, and I know I have that fluid everywhere. Going to pop this line off, stick this on here. We're going to stick it in the upward position because we have plenty of room. I may even tilt it back a little bit because we'll have plenty of room for that as well to go to the, for our wires to run back. So that'll work out just as fine. And I think that'll be perfect. Then we just got a couple wires to hook up and bolt her back up and fill it up with some power steering fluid. Okay, so we got our cooler all buttoned back up. Got it plumbed up with that new fitting there. Hooked some wires up. Got one of them going to the ground bolt here so that it can complete that ground circuit to trip the relay. So now either one of those can turn it on. Definitely not a fun part taking this cooler on and off. It's real easy when the bumper's not on, but it's a little bit more of a pain this way. And my personal favorite fluid going in this truck here, Lucas power steering fluid, which is crystal clear fluid. It does feel good. The fluid that came out of it was a little bit dark, but I think that's from where we've kind of, had it so hot a few times. Because there was actually one time where when I was putting the bumper on, I had that wire unplugged. I must have knocked it with my hand or something, wrist, and didn't realize it. And the fluid did get a little bit warm, so it was due for a change anyways. Next up is going to be tearing into that cowl and seeing what kind of leak we can find under there, or not so much a leak, but where it could leak is what we will be looking for. So we're going to dive into that. It's getting kind of late tonight, so that's going to do it for tonight. We're going to get back on this thing and dig into that cowl, see what's going on there. Got the cowl panel off here, took the windshield wipers off the cowl, and also the black plastic grate that goes underneath it to cover up these big holes here. And I'm not seeing anything obvious like I was hoping to find. The seam sealer actually looks pretty decent. Nothing obvious yet. And down here, that's where on the right hand side, you can see the blower motor there for the air conditioner. And that little piece that's sticking out to the left that's kind of round, that's the door where it's going to suck the fresh air from the cab. Because just above that in this weird triangle void area here, you can see like a rub line across there. That's where the recirculate door goes on the cowl. And I took that off of my old truck because this truck was originally not an AC truck and it doesn't function. I just welded it so it stays closed, so the truck is always on circulate AC for max air. We're in Florida, we need that. Let's get that air as cool as we can, so that's what I did. So I'm going to get all this cleaned up, wipe down with some cleaner, and probably scuff it up with a brush a little bit too, if I can, a wire brush, to try to get a little more bite on the new seam sealer. And actually over here in the middle, you can see it's definitely looking a little worse, and that seam sealer is coming loose on the edge. So maybe that's where our leak's coming from, and it's just running down and you can't really see. But I know that we're going to have some new seam sealer on here, and we'll eliminate that whole problem. So as I started wire brushing all this, just below from that screw there that comes through from the firewall, there's a crack in the seam sealer, and that kind of lines up with what's on the inside of what appeared to be a water trail. It wasn't real distinct, so it's hard to tell, but I've got a feeling that's where our problem came from. Like I say, we're going to brush this whole thing down with a steel wire brush and, knock all the crud off of the top of that seam sealer. We're going to have a fresh coat of seam sealer. I'm going to do the whole seam across the truck while this thing's apart. It's too easy to do it at this point, and then we know we're good. So the product we're actually using is Evercoat brushable seam sealer, and I did the driver's side already. It actually flows out pretty nice. I am happy with it. Try to get you a little bit of a shot here without stuff being in the way. It's not perfect. It's far from it, but it will be sealed up much better than it was, because there's a lot of cracks in this old factory seam sealer. And I think I may actually do 2 coats of this stuff. Give this a few days to let all this get dried and cured out, and do it again before I go through the hassle of putting the cowl panel back on. Seam sealer's not the cheapest thing, but I've got a quart, which is more than I'm going to use, so I might as well put it to use. It's not going to do me any good on the shelf. We'll use it, and then we know we've covered as much as we possibly can. And it's pretty messy. It's sticky, gooey stuff, but it's all in an area that's not going to be seen, so it doesn't have to be perfect at all. So we put on a nice thick, even coat. I try not to go too thick because I don't want it to stay gooey inside and you know, crust over on the top, but a decent layer of that seam sealer all the way across the cowl panel. I really think we had several leaks that are there, just didn't realize, and it's hard to tell on the inside because the insulation on the firewall that's sandwiched between the firewall and the AC box. I tried to put some fluid down in there and see if I could get it to run in, and we couldn't see anything, but that insulation is just going to soak it all up, and there were a few other rusty spots along there, so I really think we're onto something with that seam sealer leaking across the truck. But let me show you what we got here. I'm going to let it go ahead and cure out for a couple days, and I may go ahead and put another coat on there. You can see this factory stuff here to the left where it's actually flaking off some, just where like they had swiped the brush across it, but got that all filled in. It's not easy to get to with the hood and everything, trying to be careful, but it's in there all the way across. Looks really good. It actually flows out and lays down really nice. So gonna let that cure and come back and hit it again with another coat, and then we should be able to put this thing back together. Putting on the final coat of seam sealer on this cowl seal across this truck. I did find a couple little pockets. Let me see if I can zoom in here and show you a little bit. There's some tiny little holes that I wasn't a fan of, little specks. They may not be that big of a deal, but figured, you know what, while we're going this far, let's make sure this thing's 100%, put a second coat on it, so now we know this thing's officially going to be sealed up. Once that's done, we can put our screen back across the cowl, put the cowl panel back on, and this thing is done. So hope y'all enjoyed it. Thanks for watching Junko Jr., and we will see you next time.